At the Tokyo Game Show of 1999, attendees walked the halls of the show floor checking out the latest games. There are demos and trailers everywhere for games across all consoles. The show was buzzing with chatter about Sega's Dreamcast, which launched in North America just a few days before. The next generation of gaming was finally here, and everyone was excited to see what the games industry could offer on a new set of hardware. The Tokyo Game Show, however, quickly turned into the final hurrah for many systems and their library of games. On September 20th, 1999, Sony finally unveiled their successor to the original PlayStation. Showgirls walked onto the stage, and in their hands were striking black monoliths embroidered across the system with three symbols: PS2. Sony's next console was right around the corner, and with it, the end of the PlayStation's life as the most popular game system in the world. This is the story of the PlayStation. In the finale of this series, we'll be taking a look at the final game releases for the PlayStation, as it makes way for a new generation of consoles. But first, I wanted to share a nostalgic story regarding the PlayStation like I've done in so many videos before. However, I didn't grow up with the PlayStation, and I have few memories associated with it. Instead, I asked my friend, Drunk Metroid, to share his thoughts on the PlayStation. Enjoy.
The PlayStation 1 is the first real next-gen experience that I can remember having. I spent my early childhood mostly playing old SNES games, and mostly Nintendo titles at that. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, these were the only kinds of games there were and that I needed as far as I was concerned. But the PS1 is where most of my strongest childhood gaming memories lie. The almost overwhelming sound of the PS1 boot-up screen, followed by the trailing PS1 logo, was immediately seared into the minds of an entire generation of players. It was a console of many firsts for me, such as experiencing my first 3D games, my first exposure to more mature games, and the introduction to so many new series and so much more. It's responsible for conjuring my love of RPGs with titles like the iconic Final Fantasy VII and the cult classic Legend of Dragoon. Final Fantasy VII's presentation blew me away. The FMVs, battle visuals, and music were unlike anything I could have imagined coming off a SNES. Parasite Eve's impressive graphics and grotesque FMVs like the rat transformation sequence left a permanent impression on my mind of a more grown-up side of video games that I didn't know was there. Demo discs are another thing that I remember fondly when reflecting on the PS1. The unbelievably greater exposure I had to games through demo discs and was invaluable in expanding my idea of just how different and how many kinds of games there were. Medieval, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Tomb Raider, and Metal Gear Solid were all classic games I first discovered through demo discs. The aforementioned Legend of Dragoon I also found out about through a demo disc and had no choice afterwards but to worry my parents until I got a copy. It went on to become and still remains one of my favorite games today and cemented JRPGs as a core area of my taste in games. While I did play and enjoy the Nintendo 64 as well, and had tons of good times with it, sorry Sega fans, no Saturn for me, the PS1 just signaled such a widening in my overall gaming perspective with a perfect storm of technical advancement, greater exposure, and improved accessibility all before the internet age. That's what makes it sit at the top as one of my favorite platforms and to me one of the most important. Weird texture wobbling and broken Z-axis and all.
The dawn of a new millennium shined bright in the early months of 2000. The PlayStation was by and far the current leader in the console race, with the console still selling tens of millions of units each year. The end of the 1990s showed that Sony couldn't rest on their laurels, however. Sega, after failing to find the same level of success with the Saturn that their previous systems attained, opted to discontinue the console in 1998. This made room for Sega's new console, the Dreamcast, which came to Japanese markets in the second half of 1998. At the time, the Dreamcast was the most powerful gaming console on the market, and the difference between PlayStation and Dreamcast games was apparent. A successor to the PlayStation launched in 2000, simply called the PlayStation 2. The system launched in March of 2000 in Japan. The PlayStation, a project developers at Sony had been working on for over a decade, was coming to an end. Not only did the PlayStation 2 have better hardware, allowing for new experiences in video games, but the system was also backwards compatible with all PlayStation titles. This came as both a blessing and a curse for the original PlayStation. On the one hand, new software for the console still trickled out, especially in areas outside of Japan that wouldn't get the PlayStation 2 until the fall. On the other hand, the PlayStation was now firmly seen as a budget console. All of the features that made the PlayStation the premier gaming and multimedia device of the 1990s were simply incorporated into the PlayStation 2. Additionally, the PlayStation 2 served as a Trojan horse for Sony's other big foray into entertainment at the time. Every PlayStation 2 was made with a built-in DVD player, giving consumers a single, affordable system to play all of their movies, music, and PlayStation games. The PlayStation 2's launch in Japan didn't slow down the steady releases coming to the PlayStation. In February, Fear Effect released on the PlayStation, although PAL customers didn't see the game until August. This beefy adventure game came on 4 discs and was one of the first uses of cell shading in video games. The title was a modest success for publisher Eidos, and a follow-up called Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix hit the PlayStation roughly a year later. March was dominated by sequels to already established PlayStation hits. Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, Siphon Filter 2, Hot Shots Golf 2, and Armored Core Master of the Arena were all released in North America. Front Mission 3, a tactical role-playing game from Square, was also released in North America following its launch in Japan the year before. Despite the 3 in the name, however, it was the first game in the Front Mission series to see release outside of Japan. June marked another E3, but unlike every E3 Sony had attended in the past, the PlayStation wasn't front and center. The PlayStation 2 was on full display at the event, with demo lines stretching far and wide to play the upcoming releases for Sony's second system. Metal Gear Solid 2, a full sequel to the PlayStation original, was the talk of the show, with Konami showing off a demo of the game's opening level on repeat at the front of their booth. The level of detail showcased in the game's trailer wowed gamers across the board. The next generation was truly here. Sega was also showing off its biggest titles for the Dreamcast, and struggling to maintain relevance. Microsoft came to the show as well, showcasing their chrome-plated Xbox for the world to see. In a little over a year, Sega would leave the console market and Microsoft would enter it, setting up the 6th generation of consoles to be a 3-way bout between Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft. The rest of the summer was fairly quiet for the PlayStation. Just a few days after E3, The Legend of Dragoon was released on the PlayStation. Developed by Japan Studio and published by Sony, it served as Sony's attempt to cash in on the growing market of Japanese role-playing games. Unfortunately, the title was only a mild success for Sony, and it failed to be turned into a series on future PlayStation consoles. In July, Capcom ported Strider 2 to the PlayStation, following its release in arcades in late 1999. The biggest release of the summer was a revised model of the PlayStation, dubbed the PS1. This remodel hit Japanese store shelves on July 7, 2000. It wasn't the first time Sony had redesigned the PlayStation, as new models of the console began rolling out in 1996 that removed certain ports on the back of the console. The PS1, however, was more akin to a slim model. It featured a smaller size and came bundled with a single DualShock controller. A small 5-inch LCD screen was released for the system, and special adapters to power the system through a car's cigarette lighter were also released. The PS1 was released in North America and Europe in September, and helped propel the PlayStation to further popularity in the later years of its life. The PS1 alone sold nearly 30 million units, or over 25% of all PlayStation 1 consoles. August signaled the end of the summer gaming drought, and brought with it a host of unique titles for players to play. Square released yet another JRPG with Chrono Cross, a follow-up to their Super Nintendo masterpiece. While being released in Japan a year earlier, those in Europe and PAL territories got the worst of it. The game would never be released on the original PlayStation. At the end of the month, Capcom released Resident Evil Survivor for the PlayStation. A spin-off for the franchise, Survivor was developed by Toze, and ditched the survival horror elements of previous titles in favor of first-person shooting using a light gun. Survivor kept up the trend of annual releases for the series, but it wasn't met with glowing reviews. The biggest failure of the title came from the game's lack of compatibility with light guns in the North American version of the game. September and October were somewhat lighter on releases. This was due in part to the PlayStation 2 launching in North America on October 26, with PAL territories getting the system a month later in November. September's biggest game release was Dino Crisis 2, a sequel to Capcom's dinosaur horror title. Medal of Honor Underground hit the PlayStation in October, following up the previous year's surprise hit. October also featured the third and final entry of the Spyro series on the PlayStation, with Spyro Year of the Dragon. Much like Naughty Dog before them, Insomniac Games completed their contract with Universal Games following Year of the Dragon, and the developer shifted its focus to a new franchise on the PlayStation 2. Thankfully for PlayStation fans, November looked like any other holiday for the system, despite the newer PS2 being available. Crash Bash, a party game spin-off featuring Sony's pseudo mascot, hit the system, but was met with harsh reviews. Lara Croft made her annual appearance with the 5th entry of the Tomb Raider series called Tomb Raider Chronicles. This entry, however, marked a stark change from the last 3. A week after coming out on the PlayStation, Lara Croft's latest adventure was also released on the Dreamcast. Neither game compared to the biggest release of the month, and arguably the biggest PlayStation release of the year. On November 13th, Final Fantasy IX came out on the PlayStation and was a smash hit. While sales for the 3rd mainline entry on the PlayStation were lower than the previous 2, Final Fantasy IX was a blockbuster release, selling over 5 million copies and receiving strong reviews from critics. The last notable release in North America came on December 11th with Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. The title sold poorly, in part to being the second part of a 2-part sequel. The first part, Persona 2 Innocent Sin, was only released in Japan and wouldn't make its way over to the States until the remake on the PSP. Eternal Punishment served as the final entry of the series for the PlayStation, and a follow-up, Persona 3, wouldn't come out until 2006. By 2001, new releases on the PlayStation were few and far between, with many of the biggest releases being multi-platform titles with superior versions on new generations of consoles. The first half of the year was largely barren, with the most notable release in North America being Mega Man X5 in January. The fall was slightly kinder to the console. At the end of October, the biggest PlayStation game in Japan finally made its way west. Dragon Quest VII was released on the PlayStation over a year ago in the Far East and sold incredibly well following the series' brief hiatus. Spurred by the popularity of Japanese role-playing games in North America, Enix released Dragon Quest VII as Dragon Warrior 7 in the region. Past entries in the series had failed to see the same level of success in North America as they had in their home country, and 7 was no different. Despite selling nearly 4 million copies in Japan, the North American release only managed to push around 200,000 units. Future releases in the series would drop the Dragon Warrior name entirely, opting to use Dragon Quest worldwide, beginning with the 8th entry of the series on the PlayStation 2. Twisted Metal Small Brawl, a spin-off developed by Incognito Entertainment, was released in November. The title didn't receive as much attention, unfortunately, due to the PlayStation 2 entry of the series, Twisted Metal Black, coming out months before it. Another Sony published title was Siphon Filter 3, the final entry of the series to be released on the PlayStation when it came out on November 30th. In early December, Mega Man X6 was released, marking an end to the Blue Bombers run on the original PlayStation. The most popular game of 2001, however, didn't feature stealth shooting, fantasy battles, or futuristic cityscapes to explore. It took place at a small school called Hogwarts and featured the witches and wizards of the year's biggest film. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone for those outside of America, was a massive hit in theaters, and the PlayStation game based on the movie was just as big. Developed by Argonaut Games, best known for their work on the first Star Fox game and the Croc series of platformers, Sorcerer's Stone was met with mixed reviews. Praise was given to the game's direction and recreation of the iconic Hogwarts campus, but most reviews pointed out one major flaw. The game was just too outdated to be a modern hit. The popularity of the Harry Potter franchise, however, was still more than enough to make it a commercial hit. Despite being released so late during the PlayStation's life, it sold 8 million copies on the console alone, making it the 6th best-selling game on the PlayStation. After 2001, new releases for the original PlayStation dried up to only feature the basics. Licensed games, annual sports titles, and ports of PC and other console games dotted their release charts. The biggest release of 2002 for the system was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, the final entry of the skateboard series to appear on the PlayStation. 2003 was even more scant. The only notable release in North America at this time was Final Fantasy Origins, a compilation pack of Final Fantasy 1 and 2. Based on the Wonder Swan remakes, the compilation was released in Japan the year before and hit European and American store shelves in the spring. The compilation was notable for being the first release of Final Fantasy II in North America, and the first time either Final Fantasy game was released in Europe. Despite the popularity of the Final Fantasy brand, however, Origins just couldn't compete with the large range of new games on newer platforms. But if you're interested in owning your own copy of the game, you can still purchase new versions directly from the Square Enix store. At the time of this video's recording, you can purchase both it and a greatest hits copy of Final Fantasy IX for only $15. By 2004, the PlayStation was barely even a blip on the release calendar. Only 8 PlayStation games were released that year. The last of these titles, FIFA 2005, was released on October 12th. It was the final PlayStation game released in North America. Across the seas, PlayStation lasted a little longer. The final European game was Moorhuhn X, a German shoot-'em-up based on a popular freeware PC game. It was released on July 20th, 2005. Japan lasted the longest, as consoles tend to do in the region. The last game released in the region was Strider Hero, a port of the original arcade Strider for the PlayStation. However, this release was simply a standalone version of the game that was originally included as a bonus of the PlayStation port of Strider 2. It was released on October 24th, 2006, nearly 12 years after the PlayStation launched in Japan. A few months earlier, on March 23rd, 2006, Sony announced that production of both software and hardware of the original PlayStation would cease, bringing into the console less than a year from the launch of the PlayStation 2's successor, the PlayStation 3. Across all regions, the PlayStation boasted one of the largest libraries of any console at the time it was discontinued. Almost 8,000 unique games were released for the system, with total software sales nearing 1 billion units. In comparison, the disc-based Sega Saturn saw a little over 1,000 unique releases, and the Nintendo 64, hampered by its use of cartridges, saw less than 400. A total of nearly 103 million PlayStation consoles were sold between 1994 and 2006. At the time, the PlayStation was the first home console to cross the 100 million units sold mark, achieving the distinction in 2004. A year later, it was joined and then surpassed by the PlayStation 2. For Sony, and several other game companies who invested in the PlayStation, it was a unilateral success story. But PlayStation games wouldn't stay out of the limelight for long following the system's discontinuation. In November of 2006, Sony released the PlayStation 3 in Japan and North America. The PlayStation 3 was originally backwards compatible with both PlayStation and PlayStation 2 games, but later revisions removed the system's capabilities of playing PS2 titles. By contrast, every model of the PS3 remains backwards compatible with the original PlayStation games. If you didn't have your original PlayStation games on disc, the PS3 also had you covered. Within weeks of launching, Sony began selling titles on the PlayStation Store called PS1 Classics. These digital releases proved to be incredibly popular. New PS1 Classics were released in North America until 2016, with Japan seeing their final release all the way in 2019. For many, including myself, this became their introduction to all the PlayStation Classics. PS1 Classics weren't just limited to the PlayStation 3, however. Both the PlayStation Portable and later the PlayStation Vita were also compatible with these titles. In 2018, Sony attempted to capitalize on the growing market of mini-consoles with the release of the PlayStation Classic. Following in Nintendo's footsteps, Sony released a miniature version of the PlayStation with 20 games pre-installed on the system. The PlayStation Classic featured some major hits, like Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII, but missed many others. Upon release, the mini-console was met with a mixed reception. Criticisms were lobbied at the unit for a number of reasons. The high price point and underwhelming game selection turned away many casual consumers, while the PlayStation Classic's use of PAL versions of the game that run at a lower frame rate, and the inclusion of the original PlayStation controller as opposed to the improved DualShock kept hardcore gamers and collectors away from the system. It was swiftly discounted and discontinued by retailers. In 2021, it looked like the PlayStation story was finally going to come to an end. In a statement to gamers, Sony announced that the PlayStation Store would no longer be compatible with the PlayStation 3, PSP, or PlayStation Vita later that year, ending one of the only ways to legally purchase copies of PlayStation games. Industry and fan outcry over the discontinuation of the service prompted Sony to reverse course. The PlayStation Store on both the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita are still intact as of now, offering up a bountiful library of classics for anyone to purchase, download, and play. The PSP, on the other hand, saw its PlayStation Store use discontinued in July of 2021. And the sad truth is that this service won't last forever, and soon, hundreds of PS1 classics will only be playable to those who already have them downloaded to their systems. For some, it might be hard to imagine a time before Sony dominated the world of video games. Outside of a brief period during the late 2000s, PlayStation consoles have been the most popular options for gamers across the globe. Whether you're playing games on your PS4 or you were lucky enough to get a PS5, you owe a lot to the little gray console. The PlayStation revolutionized the gaming industry and brought it out of the shadow of Nintendo. Sony's tactics for the PlayStation were a winning success, and the company continued its reign with the even more popular PlayStation 2. For every classic released on the Saturn or Nintendo 64, it seemed like there were at least a dozen quality PlayStation games. There were so many notable releases for the system that I couldn't even cover them all in this series. Its massive library propelled the PlayStation brand to become one of Sony's crowning achievements and a centerpiece to their business strategy in the 21st century. The PlayStation was also the birthplace to so many classic games and franchises. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Tomb Raider, Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, the list goes on and on. Simply asking someone to name their favorite PlayStation game can be difficult due to the sheer quantity of quality titles on the system. The only real star from Sony to come out of the PlayStation era was Ken Kutaragi, who is now known as the father of the PlayStation. Kutaragi continued his work at Sony, helping develop the PlayStation 2. In 2003, Kutaragi accepted a promotion, becoming COO and vice chairman of Sony. He retired from the company in 2007, but stayed on as honorary chairman. Other key figures of the PlayStation's early success left Sony during the early days of the system, which opened up new opportunities for new generations of leaders in the gaming world. But the biggest thing the PlayStation did was open up the world of video games to so many more people. The tens of millions of PlayStation consoles sitting in entertainment centers or on carpeted floors created a new generation of gamers, one that has grown up to create their own games across modern platforms. It was a system like no other before it, and it will be fondly remembered by gaming enthusiasts for years to come. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story of the PlayStation. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and share this video on your favorite social media sites. In the comments, let me know your thoughts on the original PlayStation. Did you have one back in the day, and what were your favorite games for the system? Be sure to subscribe to catch the next video as soon as it releases. And, as always, thank you so much for watching.